If your child or somebody you know is at one of our secondary schools, you know that is quite small. That's for government expenditure. Then there's another big aspect of this, which is private sector expenditure, which currently, because we had already expanded the other enrollment, we reduced. But if you look at the raw numbers, we took out some figures because at that time we were doing the analysis. We weren't sure about the percentage of students in boarding school, which is a huge cost contribution. Now we know. So the current average expenditure that a household, let's say a parent, spend on a secondary student is $260. So no point telling me that tuition has already been taken, because we know that already. So that $260 include things like PTA, sports fee, entertainment fee, boarding and lodging, etc., etc. We have already analyzed the fact that 30% of students are in day schools. The initial concern that we had was whether government policy, because we have an education strategic policy for 2010 to 2020, which advises reducing boredom. The problem is that almost everybody who is an expert in education in this country, and a practitioner as well, opposes it. So CHAS opposes that policy, particularly in the northern region, because of the fact that if you tell students, to move from as day students to school, it prevents them from the kind of choice you and I benefited from, where you could stay in Accra and go to school in Koforidua. It means that now you probably go to school in Dansuma. And those kind of considerations are very important. When transportation costs all of a sudden balloon because people who are here have to go to school there, etc. So to sum up, the cost per average family for one secondary school student is around $260. So if you look at the total combined cost of educating a child, borne by both government and private sector, you are close to something around $500. Things like discretionary expenditure has not come in. So my child, I need extra class for that child, and blah, 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 that's not coming. If we do that, it will go up even higher. But those are extraneous to current analysis. Our current analysis is that the average basic is around $500. So our only job now is to look at the total enrollment in secondary school.
Faced over the years,
yes.
That the numbers will be growing.
And that numbers will be growing dramatically, because when you look at the United Nations population data, United Nations population division data,
which says about 3.8 million
of secondary school
going.
You disaggregate into JSS and SSS, and you find out that we have about 1.5 million students who could be going to secondary school who are not. And my point is that once you've made it free and you've made it compulsory, don't forget these are legal implications. Now a parent can be prosecuted for not sending their child to school. Secondly, there's a BC thing that you've dismantled. They've not explained to us now how admission is going to happen. So will your school, a very famous school in Koforidua, be required to take anybody who shows up, or do they have to implement some kind of new policy to admit secondary matter? The most important matter is that you've now opened the doors. So there are going to be a huge number of enrollees. We think here is where we diverge from the NPP upper bound. I think the $400 million that you are mentioning does not take into sufficient account the huge expansion of enrollment that will happen when you make education free and compulsory up to secondary.
And even with your calculations, you are not assuming 100%.
Yes, because of that, there are so many officers have been discussing to you in terms of we using a very huge enrollment figure in the beginning and lowering the average expenditure, etc. So we give ourselves a lot of leeway. So everything is to test, assuming practical difficulties of implementing the policy. If you move it to 100%, obviously the figures blow out of proportion.
Mustafa Hamid is with the NPP's 2012 campaign. He's joined us. I'm told he's on the phone lines.
What is in contention here is a specific policy, and we should always bear that in mind. Nobody is questioning the fact that education is very important. There are various ways of enhancing universal, accessible, affordable, and quality education. We are now examining one specific proposals, which are in two parts. One is to make it automatic for students to move from JSS into SSS. The second is to make commitments to the effect that all those students doing so and those already enrolled will benefit from free education, where free has been interpreted as fee-free. That is, they pay no fees. The challenge that we are trying to put across is the fact that you can achieve the end effect without necessarily going through a specific policy. And if you found out that a certain policy costs too much as compared to an alternative policy, then it makes sense for us to choose the alternative policy that will lead us to the same end goal or destination with the same quality effects. In fact, it is not entirely true that we don't cost the benefits of education. All the way back to Sakharopoulos, the study in the 80s, we've tried to look at what we call the social rate of return on education. That is, if you spend $1 on education as opposed to $1 on health, $1 on something else, you have trade-offs. However, what is it that you benefit at each level of education? One interesting thing that Mr. Hamid might find interesting is that we've discovered that, in actual fact, when you compare JSS graduates to SSS graduates and look at their wage earning capability after graduation, it's not that significant. In fact, it's so fascinating to note that primary school education returns much more on each dollar spent than secondary education. That tells you something. It tells you that it's not always the fact that a certain tool used in an attempt to gain a certain end always does that. So our question now is, will a free secondary education policy, as opposed to something else, which we now will define in this discussion, attain more for this country in terms of return and in terms of the end goal that we seek, which is a well-educated workforce? Now, even though we have free and compulsory primary education, that is a basic education, the fact of the matter is that we have seen a continuous and a consistent increase in the number of private schools. In fact, in the Ga district, it's estimated that 64% of students attend private schools where they pay fees. Mr. Hamid may want to avert his attention to this fact, which suggests perhaps that it's not always the case that fee-free education alone is sufficient to raise enrollment even in the public schools that are free. Secondly, we know, for instance, that notwithstanding the fact that we have free and compulsory junior secondary and primary secondary schools, academic quality has not risen to the extent where, based on academic merit, which is important because if somebody has to study, he has to have the capacity, all of these students from the JSS are able to transition to the SSS, even if it were made free today.
So now, as we move into the second part of our discussion, or more or less we're here already, as we tap the second part of our discussion, in Imani's opinion, what are the alternatives or the alternative ideas that can help us deal with the human resource challenges of today and the ones that we foresee in the next 20, 50 years? If what the NPP is suggesting isn't one that, looking at the numbers, you as a group think is the way we should go?
Excellent question. Excellent question. We all agree that we need more human resource capital. Necessarily, in an economy, you need different levels of skills and different types of skills. Some of it to be technical, some of it to be based on apprenticeship. Honorable Ayariga has already mentioned public-private partnerships as a way of achieving some of these goals. The fact remains that if your goal is to have a diverse workforce that suits every level of your economy, it may have the case that some of the welders that we need now for our oil find may not come out of the universities and may not come out from general secondary education. That might suggest an increase in the number of technical secondary education. These are complex matters, incredibly complex matters. But let us address the fundamental point, which is that we want free education because some people can't afford it, and it's not a good thing that some people can afford it, and we want everybody to be able to go to secondary school. The question is that we want to maintain a significant steady state of the transition ratio from SSS to university. It makes no sense to expand SSS graduates to the point where the economy is saturated with SSS graduates, but you're not increasing spaces at the university. So all these dynamics will have to be factored into the equation. But the point is this: if your job, or rather if your focus is to make education accessible to everybody, regardless of their background, economic or otherwise, then is that not even more the reason why those who have the means to pay should pay? Is that not more the reason why people like Kwadwo Ponkroma should be asked to make a contribution beyond taxation? Because we all know that taxation has flaws in terms of the way we're able to collect the money. But if Kwadwo Ponkroma has some money and he earns a little bit because he has a steady job at multimedia company.
You're putting too much attention. I mean, let's talk about Isaac Eboa. He
exactly.
should be able to.
In those circumstances, does it not make sense to ask him to contribute into increasing the resource level available at secondary school to improve quality?
It need not be blanket for everybody.
Very good. So
but
in
for
that
those who
sense,
can pay, maybe they can pay and even contribute a bit more.
Because our job is to increase the resource envelope for secondary education. That is the biggest challenge today. If you went around and asked the teachers and everybody else, they will say, not necessarily because the students here that they already have are paying some fees, but because despite the fact that they are paying that fees, we're not training them in ICT, we're not training them in critical analysis, we're not training them in the 3 R's. Based on that, we want to increase the resources that are available. Should that not mean, therefore, that more people should pay? So you ask us for clear, concrete policy proposals. We have a scholarship scheme in this country that is somewhat fragmented. We have an overseas scholarship scheme that is not totally transparent. Nobody knows how people. We have some idea, but it's not completely transparent.
How people are selected,
exactly.
When really the monies are paid, and all of that. You have all of them complaining here and there.
Reform the entire scholarship scheme to create 2 categories: merit-based scholarships and need-based scholarships. Where the need-based scholarships are provided at district level to parents for, or rather to children in the voucher system. So let's say you get admission to the computerized placement system. In fact, that is one point that the NPP perhaps have not averted their attention to. That system means that they will not be able to implement this piecemeal geography by geography. But beyond that, why not create a system where if somebody actually gains admission to a school but cannot pay, or through your automatic transition system, the person is placed in a school but cannot pay, a scholarship scheme that is open, transparent, everybody can access it, pays for that.
So that is your, or that's one way of answering the access question.
Very
creating access for those who cannot necessarily.
While creating mechanisms for people to introduce more funding through private channels so that the quality of education goes up.
Okay. And I was now going to come to the quality question. The quality question across board. Even for those who can pay, there are still quality questions in terms of resource allocation. Whether it's from teacher training all the way through to study aids and all of that. I'll go to Mustafa and then put these proposals to him, but I want you to tie that in so that he has both to answer.
We have unbelievably difficult supervision issues across schools. Absenteeism is one of the biggest problems that we have. In fact, in a report focused on quiet corruption by the World Bank, it's discovered that a significant number of teachers just don't show up after they are paid, or they don't come to class on time, or they don't teach at all. These are all supervision issues. The funny thing with supervision is that, including control, is that they are expensive. Now, the NPP is proposing the biggest, the most massive reforms we've seen in this country for almost 2.5 decades. Will they not be distracted from implementing the management reforms that are required at secondary level and elsewhere to ensure that supervision is happening? Because look at that, just as I mentioned, even in 1987, we're spending $600 million just for adjustment.